All right. Well, welcome everyone to How to Do More with Less, Smarter Hiring in 2026. Today, we are going to be talking about a couple of things. We have about 45 minutes together. I'm going to spend a little bit of time up front with some slides. I'm going to have a special guest join me a little later, and as per usual, we're going to open it up for questions and for Q&A as well. So we're going to cover two themes, a couple of big themes here. One is we want to take a look back and just talk about 2025, what worked with hiring, what changed, what didn't change. And then I think more importantly, how small and growing businesses can actually take advantage of this moment and use it to hire more effectively. I think what's interesting is that some of the shifts that we saw last year, we think actually create a pretty interesting open for some of the businesses that we work with day in and day out. But you really have to know how to take advantage of it and kind of compensate for what we know is happening in this tough market. So, as I mentioned before, my name is Carmen Bryant. I'm the Vice President of Marketing here at Wizehire. A little later, I'm going to have Sid, our CEO and co-founder, come up and share a little bit of his perspective as well. But I thought what we would start with first is to do a little bit of a retrospective on hiring in 2025. Quick note on housekeeping. I did just want to remind folks that we have a chat button at the bottom. So if you want to communicate with other people on the call or kind of like drop a quick note, please feel free to do that there. We also have a Q&A area so that if you have questions that you're hoping will be answered either live or potentially even written, you can leave them there as well. We'll be checking both, but I did just want to remind people that those two icons are there for your use. So I think before we start talking about 2025, it's important to take even a further step back because what we kind of knew to be true about hiring was that hiring essentially assumed a certain amount of abundance. It assumed that there was enough qualified candidates, that there was enough time to actually do the work of sorting and screening candidates, and that there were also enough internal resources so that, doing manual work was actually achievable. So those were some of the things that we learned, and that assumption really shaped how hiring processes were developed, especially at some of the larger organizations, and it really benefited them, these large enterprise organizations, in really outsized ways. So what happened in 2025? There were a lot of macro factors, and we're going to talk about what we were hearing more on the ground as well. But there were a lot of macro factors that had an impact in 2025. And what we kind of saw is that it kind of broke this abundance assumption and kind of reset the hiring market a little bit. So what we saw is that there were fewer job postings. Employer demand dropped and postings went back to pre-pandemic levels, especially for those large enterprise organizations. At the same time, we saw applications per role increase, especially for frontline and hourly workers. And this is kind of industry data, but we also saw that in our own Wizehire data in, the industries that we operate in, like real estate, legal, hospitality, especially. We saw there were a lot more applicants per role for the last 12 months versus the 12 months prior. So that was an ongoing theme. So teams were seeing more volume, but not necessarily more clarity, right? There was a lot more noise, not as much signal. At the same time that was happening, we were seeing quit rates are lower for candidates, so there was a lot more caution. We were basically in a low hire, low fire environment. So then the hiring decisions that you made were even more important because potentially that person is going to be there even longer than they would have been, say, if they had been hired, 2 years prior. So that means that there's more talent available for you to kind of access if you can find that needle in that needle stack. And I think that that's a really important note there. So what didn't change also made hiring feel really tough and occasionally risky as well. So there are some things that, I won't call them status quo, but kind of continued. And I think one of the things that doesn't change is that a bad hire still costs a lot of money. It costs about 30% of a first year salary. And of course, if you are, a business that has fewer than 500, 250 employees, you are going to feel that impact very acutely. So getting it wrong still is very, very significant. And it's also just hard in general. One of the things that we've been talking about for a long time is skills-based hiring, and getting away from this idea of credential hiring. So skill-based hiring still matters, but what we were hearing more of was the importance of hiring for skills that are more human skills, so critical thinking, problem solving, adaptability, which can actually be even more challenging to find than those hard skills, which is what we typically associate with someone being able to do their job well. Good candidates are still active, but they're harder to identify. Again, like we had Nicole Hanscom on in December, who from How to Manage a Small Law Firm, and she talked about finding a needle in a needle stack, and that's exactly what it felt like. And then, of course, no one has more time. So all of this is happening, and no one has more time because we know that teams are leaner than they've ever been in the past. So it feels harder because there's more noise, there are fewer data points, and there's a lot of pressure to get things right. Now, I do think that there is an opportunity, though, for those smaller to mid-sized businesses that we talked about, which is that obviously AI was also a big theme in 2025, and it's certainly in the HR tech space, and when it comes to hiring. But AI doesn't replace human judgment. And I think that's very, very important. And I would actually say that what it does, it is that it makes human judgment that much more important. When we think about skills-based hiring and trying to assess for things like culture fit, motivation, critical thinking, right? Those are things that really do require that human judgment. And smaller teams are often closer to the work and closer to the culture. So if you can kind of go in having that mindset of focusing that sort of like human sort of skill in that space, and can operationalize it or create structure around it, then you're going to end up having a competitive advantage. So we think this year, as we go into 2026, that the pressure is going to remain, but we also see some opportunity opening up. So in the beginning of the year, I think they're expecting unemployment to peak around 4.5%. And then towards the back half of the year, we might start to see some of the pressure ease. But I think what's interesting is that what is likely to happen is that these large organizations and enterprises are going to wait till the back half of the year to really sort of start actively recruiting. So right now we're in a space where there's high quality candidates and talent out there. Yes, they are hard to find, but there are fewer large organizations competing for that talent. So if you can figure out how to cut through the noise and get to that quality, then you can really be very well served in terms of finding the caliber of talent that you're looking for in your organization. And that's absolutely going to be driven a lot by technology, right? Like teams are leaner, human judgment is still critical. People don't have more time. So, how are we going to do all this? And it really comes down to AI and automation and kind of the technological disruption that we've already started to see. And it's already happening on both ends, right? Like we see recruiting teams are using AI. We see candidates and applicants using AI in their applications, 39%. So it's not so much a question of whether or not you should be using AI, but where to use it, right? You want to add it where it's going to create more clarity for you rather than just creating more noise. And so that I think is going to be an area where we know that there's a lot of opportunity. So what are some of the things we heard from, some of the smart businesses we were talking to in 2025? What were they doing that seemed to make a difference? And there were some pretty consistent themes. One was clarity. And again, this came up in our December webinar as well. In an environment when there is so much noise and you have fewer people, and you're trying to cut through the clutter, you have to know what you want and who you're looking for. So clarity and defining roles is going to be very, very important in this kind of market. So spending that time kind of upfront. and then filter early to reduce noise. And that can be as simple as screening questions. If you have certifications or skills that you know people need, um, filter for those as soon as you can so that the people that you actually are spending time with are the people that you should be spending time with. Stop sorting resumes manually. I mean, it was already so fast. I mean, I think when you look at data, the past few years, people spend on average 8 seconds looking at a resume. So not only is it not a lot of time per resume to do a quality assessment, but collectively it's a lot of time, and you're probably doing a disservice to that candidate, and you're probably doing a disservice to the organization by missing a lot of really high caliber folks. So sorting manually, there's just like some really, really effective ways to not have to deal with that. Resurface strong candidates from existing candidates or previous candidates. So, I think in this environment, we want to think about how to cut through the noise that's out in the market. But I think another thing we can think about is in the course of your conversations, you're probably talking to amazing people who may not be the perfect fit for this job, but might be the perfect fit for another job or for your organization. So how do you make sure that you, um, you know, manage those people, nurture those people so that you can resurface those people when you do have roles that open? And then finally, you want to focus your interviews on signal and trust. So creating a really structured process and a structured interview that is not based on gut feel. Because then you have multiple voices, it can be very easy to be distracted, and you want to be very singularly focused on what are those competencies that signal that this person is the right person for the role. So that was what we saw a lot of the smart businesses doing very consistently when it came to hiring. I think one of the things that I also wanted to leave you with, and this is kind of just like a different approach, was a few things you can think about doing now in this kind of, interesting moment that has a lot of challenges, but also creates some opportunity to start to get hiring set up for you well in 2026. One, again, define success before the resume. Before you start getting resumes, before you start even writing the job description, just in plain spoken language, what does success look like? And I think a key component of that is being clearer than you think you need to be. And the reason is, yes, it is for your own internal benefit, but also for the folks that are going to be applying to your roles. If you need someone who can work certain hours or whatever the case may be, because they're going to be self-selecting. Reduce noise early. How do you cut through the noise? How do you find the signal? Start with people you already know. And then finally, you want to compete on more than just pay, right? So start to think about and verbalize what that is. You can offer stability, you can offer growth and development, whatever it is that you think is meaningful for your industry or for that specific role is also something that you want to build into that initial sort of communication and job post. Um, so that was a lot, right? I know I wanted to be brief, but I did think it was very important to just kind of level set in terms of what we know is happening in a macro environment. And so what we really sort of recognize is that this idea of putting more hours and putting more people and just sweating it out is just not as effective anymore. We have to be a lot smarter about how it is that we're approaching hiring. And so with that, I want to bring up our CEO and co-founder, Sid, to kind of continue the conversation. But what I did was kind of talk more about the macro factors. But so in your role, you are talking to customers day in, day out. You are obviously in the weeds with people in product who are creating the solutions. I'm curious to hear from you, like, what were you hearing from customers about their experience on the ground hiring in 2025? And what were some of the things that were, pain points for them?
Yeah, Carmen, thanks again for one having me on the webinar. Amazing content thus far. So much of what you describe in the macro, it resonates with our customers, but it depends on their region, on their industry, but I think the themes are as such, right? So, yes, there's less competition versus the big business that we always used to compete with. I think a lot of us, if we think back to like just the journey over the last couple of years, 2019, we're competing in our local market. We go remote and online in 2020. all of a sudden we're competing with the Amazons of the world. We find ourselves now with less of that competition, but back to like just the unease in some parts of the economy has led to like a lot more volume of job seekers. So it's again that pattern of wow, I used to post this ad and I'd make an administrative hire in a week. Now I've just got too many candidates to even process. And I think that's like a theme across the board. But then when you get to like the more specialized roles, you're still getting the volume, but it's the quality not quite
Mm.
matching because, for your specialized roles, there may only still be 4 or 5 people in your market that are open, available, qualified, but now you just have what feels more superficially volume to work through. So that was like just one kind of like bit of unease. Because I think for a lot of operators, every time you get that notification, hey, there's a candidate, you're like jumping, oh my gosh, is it the one? I gotta like spend time on it. And it was just that balance of wait, it's becoming a little bit harder to just use the same kind of tactics, that we always used to.
And so how did that affect what we were thinking about from a product perspective in terms of like we are seeing what's happening in the market. We're talking to customers who are feeling the pain of this. How do we go about creating solutions or, thinking about innovation?
Yeah. So and look, I think the conversations from like folks that are like on the webinar and like that we have daily, that's what drives what we build at the end of the day. But so much of what we did last year was on the basis of our agent Scout. Which again,
Mhm.
we're giving much more capability to day in and day out. And one of the first things that we really did in, I would say like this is the back of, Q2, like in May, June, was really the idea that if you have lots of things that you got to do every day, much like in, like the sales side of the house or the operations side of the house, your systems are starting to help you focus your time and narrow it. And one thing we realized is that in this moment, the market is it's actually moving even faster when it comes to hiring. So a great candidate may show up, there might be a volume of a bunch of candidates that are not qualified. And if you're going down that stack order list, you were talking about manual screening, by the time you get to that great candidate, they might have already left the job market. And so, with Scout and on everyone's dashboard today, you'll see our top recommended actions. And that's based on analysis that we do every day on your behalf, looking at the 1,000 things you could do, prioritizing them based on what has the impact of driving more interviews. And I think what surprised us, even after we launched this, is we have a very high North Star that 3 recommendations are used every week. And I think we're tracking at about 70, 74% of customers are using these recommendations. And as a result, the time it takes to interview is quickly coming down. So that was like one big shift. The second one, I think, is that we needed to, in this moment where there's a lot more candidates, give more flexibility with our matching. Our matching, I think, we bring skill assessments, we bring, the whole picture with the disc and the personality assessments. It left, I think, us wanting more in 2025, which was more flexibility. We last year gave the ability for you to add more screening questions. We give you the
Yeah.
ability now to rank your priorities so that we can match, with what you're looking for in your business, not like a generic concept of what great looks like. As I think so much of what you said applies to how the product works, which is, when you post a job, it's what's the definition of success? What are the must-haves? And I think that's how we've added more flexibility. But I think there's a lot more that's coming on the horizon that'll just help give you back more time to get in front of the great candidates first.
Yeah, I mean, I think also, I mean, I am probably, I mean, obviously I work at Wizehire, so I'm going to be a little
We're all
bit
biased.
biased, but I do think that like this past year was really a banner year as far as like innovation. I'm going to I dropped a link and hopefully everyone can see it, of kind of our Wizehire Works, digital recap where we talked about it. Because to your point, so much of it was focused on just how do we make folks' life easier. I'm gonna just share my screen really quickly so
Yeah,
folks
go
can
for it.
get a look. And can folks see? Okay, yeah, great. And again, I dropped the link in the chat. So obviously we have Sid, we have CEO talking a bit about Wise Scout, and we always want to be human first in our approach. So even though AI we know is going to be such a significant tool to help people with hiring, it doesn't replace people, right? It
Yes.
really just supports people. And we want to be thinking about how we can do that, as simply as possible. Um, these are some great sort of like outcomes. And this is really not about sort of like blowing our own horn. It's more about the fact that we know that there can be good outcomes for folks when they're leveraging technology. in the right way, in a meaningful way. And so we're starting to see some really meaningful outcomes. But, so much of this is about, how do you attract more talent? So whether it's our AI assisted job description generator or our Scout compensation recommendations is one thing. And I'm not going to go through everything in a ton of detail because folks can kind of read on their own. But we have Talent Match, which is something you just alluded to. And you can see the way in which we really try to give people autonomy and control over how they define what success looks like. Uh, with candidate scorecard, we can invite people to apply, which I think is very critical. We talked about this
Yep.
idea of resurfacing previous candidates. And you can have those folks in your talent pool and then invite them to apply for an existing role, so that you have someone that you can kind of expedite into your new role.
I think, Carmen, to the point of doing more with less, that is one of the most powerful things, especially for harder to fill roles. Given that we're building relationships with candidates, we might have a great conversation. Maybe the right role isn't available right now. There might be someone that's come into your, second, third round interview. Keeping them in mind for that future role is just one way that we've seen a lot of people, essentially outcompete their competition by just going towards alternative, sources of talent.
Yeah, and you can, I think, one of the things, yeah, we're going to talk about this. I was going to say that's coming up. We have talent pool, which is where we can also create talent groups. So if you want to identify people based on skill set, certifications, or just someone you want to follow up with, right? You can flag those folks in your talent pool so that you can, engage them and keep them warm and make sure that they're ready to go when you're kind of ready to go. Um, so I think that's like a critical thing, especially in the market right now. And then let's see, I think there's a couple more things down here. Yeah, move from interest to interview faster with Scout interview scheduling, shared interview guides, automated phone screens. I want to talk about that one a little bit more. So I'm gonna put a pin, but aside from automated phone screens, do you have a favorite sort of innovation from last year or something that you're, most proud of?
Yeah, I like to think about like there's two different types of problems that we're solving. For one, it's roles that are easy to fill. How do we get you in front of top talent sooner? And I think what Scout's doing there is like really the most kind of, I think, innovative thing we've done. Where identifying top fits, handling the scheduling, making sure they show up for the interview. That's definitely like, near and dear, and we're doing a lot more there. I think for the other audience that we spend a lot of time thinking about, which are harder to fill specialized roles, I'd have to say it's our pretty big improvements to the campaigns side of the house.
Yeah,
Start to
yeah.
nurture talent and really start to think about hiring not as a funnel, but more of a network that you're trying to manage at the end of the day. And I think that's us living and hopefully fulfilling the promise for everyone that's our customer of getting the best practices from enterprise businesses, right?
Yeah.
But making them accessible so that you can just set it up, forget it, and it'll just handle the busy work for you.
There was actually a great question that came in. I was trying to go back and find it where someone was basically asking about how to let me see if I can recall it. Basically, like even when you don't have an open role, how you can kind of like do right by folks who are applying, but kind of like build that talent pipeline and that talent pool. And I think, what you're talking about and what we've talked about with campaigns and talent relationship management is for sure one way to do it. Oh, yep, I found it is how do you stay in an active hiring recruitment posture to build your bench without being deceptive that you're not currently filling roles? I was not going to do that justice.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are like I think great tools, and I think that's a very important question because that's something that everyone should be thinking about, even when you don't have a role open, because you don't want to be scrambling to hire at the last minute.
Yeah.
Um,
So, when it comes to the question of like deceptive, that's really, are you having a job that's not yet open in your budget necessarily to fill? And how do you kind of think through that? And look, there's a little bit of gray area here, and we give a couple recommendations, but a lot of organizations, with our career pages, with the QR codes in their front office, are actually posting a job that's always at the bottom, which is like, uh, show your interest for a future role. That's like one path that a lot of people have embraced. And those jobs we won't put on the job site because obviously it's not a real role. And then in industries where you are more typically seeing higher turnover. There is the concept of an evergreen job, and we
Mhm.
do actually mark that on the back end. So if it's typically a sales role, things like that, like those are very fine to just keep open because culturally there are different norms for, you may get followed up, later on or whatever the case. I do think that one thing with how we manage job seeker relationships is key, which is to always have follow-ups, which is like, hey,
Yeah.
we'll keep you in mind for a future role. So reach out to our coaches. We give a lot of advice. We definitely also confirm uh, you know, the hiring jurisdictional requirements for how to do evergreen hiring, which vary by state to state. But those are a couple of the tactics. And I think the bigger point is build a big bench, nurture them. And so then when the right role opens up, and I think people see this on the platform now, when you post a job, we'll start finding candidates that already match into that role based on prior applications. Because what Scout is doing behind the scenes is just constantly assessing with consent all the applications you've received for future fits.
Yeah. I'm gonna open it up more like broadly for questions. So folks, please, yeah, I see someone dropped in. Please feel free to ask questions, drop it in the Q&A. But I do want to give you an opportunity, Sid, to talk about something that we're working on right now or that you think is coming soon that can have a significant impact on hiring for folks on the call that you want to talk about? I kind of haven't, I might have a clue of what you want to talk about, but anything you want to share with folks on the
Yeah, I
call?
think this is my favorite part of the webinars, which is we just get to preview a little bit of what we're cooking. The theme of doing more with less, I think, is really resonant with this idea that it's not just resources, whether that's financial, it's also time. And in the current moment, we just talked about the dynamic of there's too many candidates, not all of them are a great fit, and I'm worried about missing out on top talent. I'm going to show a quick demo of something that's forthcoming in the days ahead. If any of this is interesting for you, reach out to your coach or your strategic relationship manager, and we'll definitely like look into maybe getting you into a beta that we have open right now. This is the Wizehire dashboard that we've all come to know and love. At the top, we see Scout obviously making recommendations of candidates that are worth focusing in on. As an example, this is all demo data. I'm actually going to click into Edwina real quick. And there's a couple of new technologies that we've launched. So one, obviously, last year we launched the capability for Scout to handle the scheduling for you. Just delegate it. We have your calendar. We know what times work for you. We'll figure it out. Um, Next month, we're actually launching publicly phone screens. And phone screens is a pretty powerful capability. I'm actually going to put up for a candidate that doesn't have it already started, where you can actually delegate a little bit more of your front of the hiring process to our AI agent Scout to run a back and forth Q&A on your behalf, giving you back time. And what we found is candidates love this because they can go ahead and do it on their own time. Employers in the beta are really loving it because one, it gives them back the time to really do it when they have time off the clock. Because if you're, let's say, a solopreneur, you're running a law firm, you're running a busy practice, you really want to have a high bar for who represents your business.
Mm.
That phone screen can often be, and I think all of us have been in these situations where it's like, we commit to a 30-minute call and we know 5, 6 minutes in, oh man, not the right fit. Here's another role that would be a good fit for. These are the types of opportunities we can do here. So with the phone screen product, you can click request phone screen. You can actually see the question bank that's built in. In the future, we'd have the capability for you to make your own question bank, but this is the beginning. What will happen is when you click send invitation, in this case for the readiness and logistics check, Scout is now going to follow up with the candidate. They will have the ability to start a phone screen, and a voice AI will actually have that dialogue with them that they can record their audio for. And you'll get that all back in the screen under the screening tab section. There'll be a phone screen where you can actually listen to the audio, see the highlights, skim it. And again, we can give you back more time and also give you more leverage with your time. Because in some cases, if you're like that busy business owner, operations leader, you are the bottleneck for finding talent in many cases. Let us take some of that off your plate is the thesis here. And it's been very fun to have, the early pilots going on. So that's a little preview. There you go, Carmen.
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing I'd just add on there is candidate satisfaction is very high. It's
Yes.
like I think it's 98% are positive, like neutral to positive, because I think one of the things that we've heard, not just Wise Hybrid in general, from job seekers is just this. anxiety that AI is filtering them out before they have a time to present or put their best foot forward. And even though this is AI technology, it is giving people an opportunity to
That's yeah.
present themselves, right? And get a sense for, not just kind of getting the same questions that everybody else is getting, but to sort of like put their best foot forward. And so we find that it's also a quite positive experience. I mean, obviously they know that it is AI. We're not trying to fool anybody. So that's one of the other positive, I think, benefits of automated phone screens, which we think it's going to be a lot of application for and lots of, we're excited to get folks' feedback. So coming soon.
I
You're
mean,
gonna
so
start.
and giving you back time, one interview at a time, basically.
Yeah, yeah. Um, we also had some pre-submitted questions that I'll start to kind of like dig into, but if again, if folks want to add questions, that's also fine. Here is a good one, I think, since we're talking about AI, let's stay on theme here. Someone asked how to download all resumes to all ChatGPT to read and review.
Okay, okay.
What say you, Sid?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. First off, there is an export capability in the platform. You do have to message in for it just for compliance purposes. And one thing that we're really thinking a lot about, because again, it's more of an obligation that we have for customers and partners, is really to give you the guardrails when using AI in the hiring and screening process. Hiring and screening is a regulated thing. The EEOC is working on a lot of new compliance. And so the one thing that I would, really advise or guard against is just using off-the-shelf AI for this
Mm,
purpose. At a lot of large companies, there are a lot of active, lawsuits going on here
mm,
just because of like, some, like challenges here. So one thing to consider is, yes, you may have the resume, but did you in the process get the consent from the job seeker to actually use the technology this way? What we're trying to do at Wizehire with our talent match and really is focusing on like a few key challenges that AI systems can present with the hiring process. One is, of course, getting consent. Two is really handling explainability and auditability. A lot of folks on the call maybe at larger organizations that are larger than 100 employees, where the EOC does have mandates. We all have to submit these reports every year, as far as, disparate impact. And one challenge is that if you're using a off-the-shelf AI that isn't built for this purpose, you're not getting the audit reports that you may need, should there be like a challenge to a decision. And then, the last thing is really that like, with general purpose technology, it really comes down to the prompt that you're writing. So if your prompt has a bias in it, that's going to come through. What we've tried to do with our talent match Scout is really to enable Scout not to answer the question, is someone a good fit, but really to first start with, what is the definition of fit, which really you, the employer, provide. And then we
yeah.
go ahead and try to answer the questions for each of those subcomponents. So if it's qualifications, experience, licensure, that's our kind of methodology to ensure that, we give you the right guardrails. So, that's the mileage may vary and definitely don't want to like, say you shouldn't do it, but definitely there are some compliance and regulatory challenges as things get defined later this year.
Yeah. I think that's really important, and I think it's good for everybody to know that. I'm like, why am I being, maybe that's just on my side. I'm having captions. So a question that came up in Q&A is there a way to see the source of the application for each candidate?
Yes. So this is something that's come up quite a bit, and we are actually having some product launches later this year that will help with this. Partly, and obviously, we always like want to give the why. We have insights into where the candidates come from. They do come from a multitude of sites when they apply multiple times, and some of the job sites encourage highlighting where they come from. Some do not. We're at a place where later this year, our applicant analytics product will actually highlight the sources. And we're just in the process of just getting the last few job sites to really consent to this. If you have specific questions, you can always reach out to us. We can do the analysis for you. But generically speaking, most candidates find your jobs on job sites like Indeed, ZipRecruiter, LinkedIn. But then they'll often do further research to identify, to study you, go to your website and apply on the careers page. So we will have a product update that's going to kind of capture all that in one place.
Um, Another question that just came in is, other than remote work, what non-tangible benefits are new hires looking for now? We just spoke a little bit to that, this idea of competing on more than just pay.
Yeah.
Paid. isn't necessarily enough. Flexible work or remote work is very important. But I would also say it probably depends a little bit on the industry too. Like we know that for some industries, predictable schedules
Yeah.
can be very big. So if that's something that's important in the area that you work, make sure that you are being explicit about, the fact that folks have autonomy over that. Growth and development is always kind of an opportunity. I think in hospitality, there are so many great examples of folks who have started as like a housekeeper and progressed through the organization. I think really highlighting those examples is really important. Sid, you have other sort of thoughts?
Yeah, so one of the things that we try to do, especially with our hiring coaches, is to really step back and kind of pose a question back to you when we are building your employer value proposition. Because so
Mm,
often, in our companies, we take for granted the benefits that we may have, right? So I think you want to really like scour for that, back to your point of being very detail oriented. And I think we want to start thinking about what employers are offering more holistically, right? I mean, we cannot all compete on compensation with like OpenAI. That's not the case, right? So we have to think a little bit more, abstractly, you know, and there's this, concept of total rewards. So it's, obviously the financial remunerations, valuing the benefits, the fringe benefits is a big element of this when you explain your offers, when you position the role. And then back to like, these kind of like intangibles where, actually I'd actually point to the fireside chat we had with our friends at Paychex actually
yes,
last
yes,
year,
yes, yeah.
where, sometimes I think you have to like talk to your employees first to understand what do they
Mhm.
value the most, where do they see the gaps in what we're offering. Obviously, as a business, we cannot do everything that is like, on that list. But I think one thing that we do advise is often to kind of at the beginning of the year, take a strategic lens of like, hey, are we falling behind the competition on these 4 or 5 benefits? Maybe it's healthcare, 401k, or something like that. And sometimes as a small organization, those are harder things to execute on, which is why I love the sort of partnerships we have where, a larger organization can actually help support that. So the Paychex PEO comes to mind as one example. And then I think for those that are in hospitality, kind of, a big segment of ours, I think there are a lot of larger companies that are starting to spend a lot of time with flexible pay. Because obviously, like for frontline workers, you're not just competing with a large company, you're often competing with alternate work. So being on Uber and Lyft and swiping to get, time started. So, we do have a partner, I think, Daily Pay, that's been a really good, like, resource there to just launch a flexible compensation platform that I think makes folks more competitive. So hopefully there's a couple of tactics that work. And definitely if you have questions, reach out to us or our coaches and we can, do a session to really help you look holistically in your organization and kind of frame that employer value proposition.
Let's see, we have a couple more, and again, folks, feel free to add additional questions. This one is both of these are kind of broad. So let's see. Let's start with this one first. How to better narrow responses. Like
Yeah.
how can folks bet? I mean, I feel like that's the whole thing, right? Like that's like what's happened, the macro environment kind of trying to find signal out of all the noise, applicants per role, all the things we're talking about is how do we narrow that down?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a balancing act, right? Because you can only ask the candidate so much before it's too onerous to actually go through the process, and you don't want great talent to opt out because you're asking a lot of screening questions. And so, one thing we actually made a product flexibility change earlier this year or last year was to allow you to add even more screening questions with the guidance that hey, more questions will lead to more drop off or less completion. But now with AI, we can actually start to estimate responses, which kind of
Mhm.
helps to bolster that. So one thing that I definitely would encourage is, focus on like a few questions, but ensure that they actually cover a broad diversity of the competencies and skills for the role. So often we'll see questions that are very correlated. So how many years of experience do you have in an industry? And like, let's say if you're a realtor and you're looking for years of experience and, volume of deals that they've closed. We find that a lot of those tend to have a lot of correlation. And so if you only have the opportunity to ask someone 5 questions, sometimes pivoting to a different, question actually makes more sense and is more valuable. So, if you need someone that's got specific commercial experience, like asking that question over the volume of deals that they did can be a little bit of a better use of time. The other thing is that we are seeing processes get a little bit larger or extended. So having that second phase, third phase versus all up front. We are actually, another kind of preview to what's coming up, but a couple weeks we'll actually announce the ability to change the screening and make it stage based. So maybe a disc assessment on the first round doesn't make sense and is better done on the third round. So we'll have more flexibility in the platform, but I think if you apply that just to your own process, you want to get as much signal up front, and then I think throughout the back of the process, really learn more, but also like sell a little bit of the role to the individual. And so hopefully those are helpful ways and tactics.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like the not correlated questions, I think, is a very actionable thing that folks can implement. And then the final question I have for my side, and unless there's others that folks add, is that this is very broad, how to improve recruiting in general, but especially with attorney hires. I think this is more that maybe that specialized kind of role that we were talking about.
Yeah, so I'll give a perspective specifically for attorney roles, but I think anyone that has specialized roles, a lot of this is applicable. So first off, we about 18 months ago started to work with a lot more job sites to start expanding the overall funnel. So, with attorney roles, with licensing roles, often getting your job in front of upcoming talent at, a career center or a college campus is
Mm.
pretty key. So in the platform, actually, if you sponsor an ad at a larger dollar amount, that's actually to buy advertising on those local career sites. So that's like one tactic just to get in front of people that are about to get, past the bar, as an example, or about to graduate. The other element of this is, employee referrals is a pretty powerful tool that I don't think we often leverage enough. In the product, in every plan, you have access to employee referrals. A lot of customers were actually helping to build incentivized referral programs. So when you post a job, hey, tell the team there's a $25, $30 gift certificate at Amazon for this. That's another way to get unique talent that's not actively on job sites. Because when you think about people that are experienced, licensed, seasoned, they're often already gainfully employed.
Mhm.
They're not getting the email alerts from Indeed and ZipRecruiter or LinkedIn, right? So you have to think a little bit more, alternatively there. For some roles, we are finding a lot of customers use the in-person QR codes, less applicable for the legal roles, but still very applicable. And then I think as you start to think of this not as like a single hire, but more as a long-term strategy, then you're building that talent pool, Carmen, so that whether it's 1 year from now, 2 years from now, I mean, there are people that are on our sales team that I met initially 2, 3 years ago, and now is the stars aligned. So I think you have to start to take a longer term view because if you do what we were talking about and you identified this employer value proposition, you've got this culture of a small lean team, you're going to invest invariably more in that individual, and it just may take a little bit longer, but that's just the circumstance today, and we want to at least give you all the tools to do that. Last little bit here, and just a plug for Scout, they may already be in your talent pool if you've been using us a few years, right? They may have applied for a different role. They may have been, a paralegal at that point that's gone through a life change. That we've seen customers work with us over the, last decade now, where their talent pools often are like in the orders of like, 50,000, where you just end up finding those like, diamonds in a rough that way.
Yeah. No, agreed. Is, kind of skimming through and just seeing like a law firm with 6,500 folks in their like talent pool, just kind of like, randomly. Um, we have Sid. This is kind of like an opportunity to ask him any question that, comes to mind. But I did want to just kind of do a few quick sort of things to communicate right at the in here as we start to wrap up, which is that next week we are going to be launching Wizehire Works, our Wizehire Works education series. I think one of the things that we recognize is, we're very proud of the work that we've done here, but I think more importantly is that we want to make sure that we're helping people solve problems. So the education series is really focused on talking about the core problems and then the best way to solve them, whether that is with aspects of our solution or not. So that's going to be kicking off next week. If you're already a customer or have worked with us in the past, you'll already be included in that. If you're interested in getting that outreach, feel free to let us know. We're going to be following up this webinar with a checklist on how to get set up for hiring in 2026. So for anyone who registered, we'll be sending that out to you, just kind of like a few quick things that we think you can do to be ready to go in 2026, hopefully to make your start a little bit easier. We'll also have a survey about this webinar that we will share out so that we can get your feedback and think about what are other topics that we want to cover with you. And then finally, I just wanted to bring up this page so you have our number and you kind of know what our link is in case you want to schedule some time to talk with us. I know that there were things in the chat and some back and forth about how to reach out to Wizehire coaches or anyone else that you wanted to connect with if you have a very specific question about your account. Before we officially wrap up, I wanted to see, Sid, if you had any kind of like final thoughts or comments you want to share with folks.
Yeah, look, we are inspired by the work y'all do. Our email is always available. Mine's sid@wizehire.com. The team's at team@wizehire.com. We love the ideas. We are building, this platform ultimately to make your lives easier so you could find that right talent. And, we see it as our mission in life is to really take on the busy work to do that. So thanks again for all the ideas that we've gotten. I think a lot of what's coming down in the days and weeks ahead is inspired again by folks that like on the call. Yeah, just rooting for y'all, and we're here to help wherever we can. Okay.